Hey guys, thank you for joining me, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. If you are here because of the title, you're probably here because analog goggles and what setup I'm using in 2021. This is March 2021, and this is going to be my goggle setup here. I'm not advocating goggles are better in analog than they are in digital. Honestly, if I were you and you're new in the hobby, then you're probably going to just buy digital. I think it's the better way to go. The technology is going to advance so quickly that there's no reason for you to buy analog. However, for the people that have analog and that have asked me so many questions on Instagram DMs and just overall YouTube comments, I am here to give you what you're asking for, which is exactly my analog goggle setup for March of 2021, the most updated version. I need to do some videos on gear because I'm getting so many questions on what am I using these days, especially since I've switched to FETtech flight controllers and ESCs. There's a lot of things that are changing in this world, and I have switched a couple things in the last 6 months to a year, and I haven't quite told anybody about it because I wanted to make sure I figure out all the bugs before I tell you. Because obviously if I fly it and someone knows about it and they buy it and then they have a problem with it, then that looks bad on me, and I just don't like telling people about things that I don't find to be bulletproof. So everything I use, I try to make it as bulletproof as possible, and that's not always the case. There's always going to be problems, but out there, most people are pretty happy with the gear that I use, and I am very happy with the gear that I use. Otherwise, I wouldn't fly it. If I constantly had problems with it, why would I use it? So anyways, let's get into the goggle setup. If you're here for the Fusion firmware, so there is a new TBS Fusion module, which is a receiver module that goes in these goggles. The firmware, I'll put a timestamp here so that you can go check that out, because there is a new firmware. It's 2.15. It's live on the TBS agent. If you have a Fusion and you want to update that firmware, it's extremely intuitive, and I have been working on it for the last 3 months with the guy George that creates this user interface. I love it. It has personally been touched by me and telling him what I want, and then us figuring out and refining that specific thing, because it is kind of a pain in the butt when you want a goggle module to do one thing and it doesn't do that, or it does something that you think it should, but it does it in a weird way. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into the goggles, and this is going to be a comprehensive breakdown of every single goggle component that I use. So these are Fat Shark HDO2s. They are analog goggles, and they have a lot of modified parts on them, not necessarily the goggles themselves, but the actual add-ons are very specific, to me at least. There are other analog goggles out there like the Orcas, which I think are a very good goggle, and I would recommend those as well. The HDO2s just seem to be the best bang for the buck, and they also offer interpupillary distance adjustment, which is like this, and then they also offer some diopter adjustment if you have any visual impairments within reason. Obviously, I think it's like -2 to +2. So again, these goggles have that, other goggles do not. This goggle is an OLED screen. It comes in this case. This is, again, the factory Fat Shark HDO case. And this is how I rock it. I open them up, I put my things inside just like this. And the reasoning I do this, I'm only telling you this because this is long-term learned and trial and error. And I'm just trying to save you guys some money, because at the end of the day, if you scratch a lens on one of these things, you're going to see it every time you fly, and it's a pain in the butt. So I mitigate that by putting my loose floating items behind a microfiber cloth. So I put a microfiber cloth down, and then if I want to put my patch antenna or something, I put it there so that it doesn't ever touch the lens. I know there are little 3D printed inserts you can put in there. I don't do that. I just try to keep it as simple as possible. I got my directional antenna, my microfiber cloth. I put it like that. It works really well. It has worked that well for me for many years. I haven't had any issues, no scratches on my lenses. We'll talk about the antennas here in a little bit, but let's set that aside for now, and I'll go ahead and pull these goggles out so that you can see where my other antenna is, and that is underneath the back right there. So this is a omnidirectional antenna. We will talk about those here in a little bit. I have been working on very specific specialized antennas that I use myself, and I develop them with VAS, or Video Aerial Systems. Alex Grieve, if you know him, he is one of the best video receiving and transmitting antenna makers in, I don't know, the world, really. For the FPV, he is the guy. So check him out. I worked with him on that project. I'll talk about that later in this video. So here are the goggles. Yes, they are Hello Kitty. Why is Hello Kitty important? Well, it's exactly like my mustache. It started out as a joke, and it became a thing, and people know me for the Hello Kitty goggles and the mustache. So that's why I have them. These I can't find extra shells for. Again, these are the Dominator HDO2s. Since they changed the back design with this new diopter adjustment and the overall optics change since the original Fat Sharks, which were more of a rectangle. I haven't been able to find these shells, so I ended up having to just take these goggles apart, hydro dip them myself. I'll put some B-roll here because it was ridiculous.
Big parts. Pretty. Fuck yeah.
I had never hydro dipped anything in my life. I had to figure it out. It took me about 4 or 5 hours, figured it out, and I put some clear coat on them and assembled them back together, and they look like this. I am very happy with it. Can't complain. I think it came out very well considering I'd never done that before. As far as the goggles themselves, they are completely stock. There's nothing modified about the goggles themselves. However, the foam that I use for the faceplate, the goggle strap, the receiving module, the earphone that I use, and the battery that I use are things that I have added and customized, so I will talk about those now. And the first thing I'll talk about is the foam that I use. So this is a question I get asked a lot, and that is what foam I'm using for my faceplate. This is actually a neoprene foam made by Newbie Drone. So I'm going to put the links in the description for all of these items. You can go check them out. I have no affiliation with them. I'm just letting you know what these things are. This is a neoprene foam. It's semi-thick. It's kind of about twice as thick as the stock foam, so it puts your eyes at an optimal distance. For me, obviously, it might vary for everybody, but I feel like this is a very good foam, and overall, it's a very comfortable foam. This is actually the first generation HDO. I think it's actually the HD2 neoprene foam. The new foam is a little bit less material. It has a little bit less material right here, and I found that that one works well, but for me with a sharp nose, I find that this one works better. So if you have a little bit flatter of a bridge, you can see my nose protrudes a lot and is very sharp, so I find this works well for me. Again, Newbie Drone neoprene foam. The next thing you'll see is this ETHiX goggle strap here. This is a 1.5 inch strap. I find that 2 inches is a little too big. It kind of rubs on your ears when you put it on, and 1 inch is not enough. So 1.5 seems to be the way to go. This material is very soft, doesn't slip off your head, it's stretchable, has obviously adjustments to make sure it fits your head correctly. And then also on this side, you'll see the battery is strapped in there. There are a couple of variations of this goggle strap. The newest one does not have this buckle here, which I find sometimes is good and sometimes is not, and I prefer no buckle. So on the new ones, it does not have that buckle. But it is very similar in design, and honestly, I prefer that other design that is now the main one, but I wanted to rock a green strap, so I just used this one. It's one of our older designs. So if I pop the battery out here, you'll see that on the inside there is rubber bubbles, so they grab the battery so it doesn't fall out, and they are on inside and outside on our newer straps. So it's very nice. I love this strap. I have no complaints. It just fits and works so naturally that I don't even think about it, and I like the green. So the battery that I'm using is a Thunder Power 2000 milliamp 2S, and the reason I use this battery is because it does come with the barrel connector and everything as you would need. Has an XT60 to charge quickly because no one likes charging through a barrel connector, and it's not as big and bulky as those 18650 packs, which can be almost 3 times as thick as this. So the reason I like it, again, is because of its form factor and its ability that you can charge it quickly with an XT60, and it's a lithium polymer battery. I don't know, I just prefer lithium polymer over the 18650s. I do own a Tesla, I do like 18650s, but for this particular case, I like this. That was not a flex, that was just me telling you I have 18650s. I like them, there's no reason not to like them. I just think this is a better form factor for this particular situation. So the next thing that you will see is this, which is the dangly earbud that goes in my ear so that I can hear audio from my drone. So specifically, audio in general is not really common in FPV. Analog is really the only place that it is because it has a carrier channel which you can send the audio signal back from. I have an audio mic on my drones itself, like themselves. I specifically designed it to have audio, and I tuned the tuned this can, not a camera, I tuned this can to specifically suit that microphone. So it works with other microphones, but it is definitely tuned specifically for that microphone. If you're flying an Apex and you have my OSD board with the microphone on it, it's very, very well tuned for that, and you can hear things very well. Obviously, it sounds like a quad screaming, but the reason I use audio is so that in certain scenarios, if I'm being distracted by something, even if you're flying at a race, you're flying with other people, you can hear other quads and it can distract you. There are many advantages to having audio versus not having audio. Some say that audio is annoying, and I find audio to be very helpful. So it's like having an extra sense on board. Now you can hear it and you can see it. So again, it's not for everybody, but I find it to be perfect. And I like this thing because obviously I try to refine everything I possibly can in life to make it as easy as possible and as useful as possible. And this thing with the 90-degree little 3.5 mil jack fits perfectly when you lay it flat. There are other companies out there that make these big, long, sticky plugs that look really cool, but they stick out the bottom and you set the goggles down and they're all lopsided. So 90-degree angle here, very cheap. I think this thing's like $6. Super good. The only thing I advise is when you get it, I think we're trying to do this on the newer ones, super glue this thing on so that it never comes off, and then you'll be fine. That's the only thing that I've modified as far as that is concerned. Now, let's get into the receiver module and the receiving antennas. But before we get into the receiving module, because I have a lot to talk about when we talk about the new firmware, let's talk about receiving antennas. So I have these two antennas here. This is an ETHiX. Both of these products are ETHiX VAS collaborations. This is an ETHiX crosshair antenna. It's actually a mixture between the crosshair extreme, which is a larger antenna, about this big with 6 elements. This is the same form factor as the normal crosshair, which has 4 elements. Basically, the bigger antenna can go further. The smaller antenna can't go as far, but has a wider beam. I kind of mix the two together, put the 6-element piece inside the smaller form factor so that it would fit inside my goggle case. So it's a mixture between the crosshair extreme receiving element and the or active element, and then I guess it's not, I don't know, the 6-element piece versus the smaller form factor of this back plate. So it does fit in my goggle case. And then the other factor is this, which is an omnidirectional antenna. And this is a Mad Mushroom V2. If you know me, if you've ever seen me flying, I'm always flying with a Mad Mushroom. I've been flying with them since day one in 2014. I've just always thought that Alex Grieve in general has made the best antennas on the market, and I've stuck with him for the last 7 years now. Not sponsored by him at all, just like what he does, and I collaborated with him on this, and this is his newer updated version, the Mad Mushroom V2. I added a 5.5-inch semi-flexible coax and also a reinforced 90-degree adapter here. So this is soldered around this edge so that if you are familiar with 90-degree adapters, sometimes when you screw them on, they can pop off because this connector is a press fit. It is usually just stuck in there with pressure, and it's held in with the tension between these two pieces of metal, and it can break off. So this one is reinforced, comes like that from the factory, which means it's basically soldered around the edge. It's easy to do, but it's also nice that it comes that way and it doesn't cost you anything extra. So again, why is this thing tall? Well, it puts it above your head because higher frequencies like 5.8 gigahertz get blocked by humidity, water, moisture, anything like that. So the higher it is, the better. But obviously, too tall, you lose some signal within the length of the wire, and also it doesn't pack up. So this seems to be the optimal length to fit in the goggle case and also put the antenna high enough to where it gets it over your head. Then I use this crosshair antenna here, and I put it with its 45-degree angle antenna or SMA connector that it comes with on the bottom. So I'll just go ahead and set this up exactly how I would when I go out and fly. And there we go. So I got the 45 on the crosshair, set it up like that. So it's basically lined up with the front of my head. So if I want to turn my head, I know that wherever my nose is pointed, I'm going to have the optimal reception because that is where my antenna is pointed. Versus some antennas are pointed off the side, and then you got to calculate, oh, where's my head? Okay, my antenna's that way. It just makes it easier if it's straight on with your head. And then also the receiving antenna, this omnidirectional, is on that 90-degree on the top receiver. Again, putting it as high as it possibly can go so that your head is not in the way. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the receiver module. And again, this is not what I typically have been using for the last few years, which was the Immersion RC. I always get this confused. Immersion RC Rapid Fire. That was a very good diversity receiving module that I had used for a long period of time. The Fusion came out in its early days, and I just thought the user interface was not very good. It just didn't work really well, and I had complained about that, and nothing was done. And then eventually it got to a point where I felt like I needed to complain and talk to the right people. So I talked to this guy, George, that does the user interface for these things, and we spent the last 3 months trying to get this thing set up the way that I think it should be set up, because on paper, the Fusion technically outperforms most of the other modules on the market, and it's also a smaller form factor, and it's made by a company that I work with, so it just makes sense in general for me to use this product so that I have feedback and can provide feedback for something that I use on a regular basis, where if it was another company's, I can't really talk to them, not because I have a problem with them or anything, it's just, you know, you're not like directly connected with the right people always, and this, you know, I was directly connected with the right people, so I was able to make a difference. So let's go ahead and turn this guy on, and I will show you what I'm talking about with these new changes. This firmware is live on the TBS Agent. If you go on TBS Agent right now, there is a firmware update for the TBS Fusion. and that is 2.15, I think is the number. So if it's older than that, look for 2.15. So let's go ahead and check this out. We're in static right now. I'm just going to show you this without a quad on, so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. So I'm going to click right, and we're going to bring up our basic spectrum. So this is our, where we want to change channels. I can click left and right, and you can see that I'm changing from R3 to R6. Very, very self-explanatory, and also something you've seen before. However, the thing that you haven't seen before is the box at the top and that little bar in the middle that is scanning across. So what this is doing is scanning every second or two, and it's giving you a basic live spectrum analyzer on the top of the screen while you're changing your channel on the bottom. So if I'm going here, it's between 5.3 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz. I'm scrolling through. I can go down to low band. I can do whatever I need to do, but let's just say I'm on race band. I'm scrolling around, and I'm looking at the spectrum analyzer at the top, and you see that little spike right there? So that spike that showed up for a second was on R3, because you see the dotted line that I'm moving left and right. That is what channel I'm on based on the spectrum at the top here. So it's on R3. There was a tiny little spike around 5.7 gigahertz, and I would not want to go on that channel if I wanted the most clean channel. There is a bump here in general, like this whole bump over the 5.8 gigahertz range. There's a little spike again on race band 4. I would not want to go on these if I were flying and wanting to get the best signal. I would try to go with something that is less or lower. Now, if I turn a quad on, it will obviously change. So let me go ahead and plug a quad in, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is a live spectrum analyzer within the actual adjustments of your channel. So you don't have to go to the spectrum analyzer specifically anymore to see these things happening. So now that we have a quad on, I can see that, hey, the quad is on race 8, and now the whole noise floor has raised because there's a quad on 800 milliwatts or a watt next to me just sitting on. So you can see that thing scanning. I'm on race 8. The dotted line in the upper area is showing me what channel I'm on, where it lies on the spectrum, and then obviously that thing right there is the channel that I'm on. If I don't do anything, it will stay here forever. I just have to click center and it locks in. So it's not timed, which is kind of stupid. Sometimes I find that when you time something, it gets annoying because you come in here and you do something and then you don't know what you're doing and you're looking at something and then it goes away. Well, this is locked forever until you click center, and then it locks on the channel that you want to go on. So another really cool feature is if you click center on here and you go to the actual spectrum analyzer, it's a lot more intuitive, and also a lot more information is provided. So if you're looking at here, it's from 5.3 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz, also like we were on the previous one, except it's giving you a dB range from -20 to -100, and it's giving you all the little spikes in the middle. It's showing you that, hey, there is something over here on the far right side of the spectrum, which is actually my quad that's on, and then there's a little spike down there at 5.4 gigahertz, and that's probably a harmonic coming off the transmitter of my quad, and it's scanning super quickly. Now, if I don't have a quad on and I'm just using this to scan an area for an RF environment, I'll show you if I unplug the quad, and it shows me that area. So this is now my house. This is my house's Wi-Fi. It's scanning and giving me all of what's here as far as that bump. So the bump between like 90 and -100, or -90 and -100, is my house Wi-Fi. So it's not the cleanest signal in the world. There is a little bit of a spectrum as far as something on the 5 gigahertz range, but I can see that now. I can see how low it is, and that from -100 is the best possible thing ever. -80 is probably decent. Anything under -80, closer to 0, is going to be a pretty crappy environment. So the other cool feature is you can go through by clicking right, and you see in the lower left it says spikes. So that's the band E, this is band F, this is band R. So if there was a spike somewhere, it would give you the 4 channels that have the highest possible spikes on them. So these are channels that you don't want to fly on. So these would be like the worst channels. So race 1, 2, and 3. It's just picking channels right now that have tiny spikes on them, because this environment is pretty safe. I would say, like, flying around my Wi-Fi isn't gonna do anything. But if you were in an RF noisy environment, it would tell you what channels you should not be on, and you can also flip through and see what band and what channel that you don't want to be on. So it's a super sick feature as far as the spectrum analyzer is concerned. Super intuitive. You can see it pulsing down there every time it scans. You just click back, and you're out again. If you want to go in and look at the channels, you get a basic version of what I was just talking about in the main thing, but it's not as refined, but it does give you a basic idea. So if you were out flying and you saw, oh, whoa, there's a little spike there, and then you were curious, you know, you would just click in, go back here, and then look at the actual spectrum analyzer, and then, you know, you could see exactly what that thing was if it needed to be investigated further. So, with all of that, I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you have any questions, you can put them in the comment section below. I will look at them, and I will reply to as many as I possibly can. And I hope you enjoyed it, and, you know, thank you for joining me, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come listen to me talk about stuff that I like to geek out on. So, have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.